We got the bad guy, Chael Sonnen, here on the program. Chael, how are you this morning?
Still famous and still rich. Thank you, pal. How was your weekend?
My weekend was great. Got some time with the kids. Got to watch some UFC, but was really excited for this interview. We haven't done one in, I think, a year. I was just looking at it there. And of course, I see you at the Silva and Paul presser last week. Tell me how that all came together. I know you've done work for Showtime before, but when did you get the call to go do this?
All right. So Showtime never called me. Ariel did. Ariel was scheduled to do it. And I don't know if that means you have a contract. I don't know how all that stuff works, but he was scheduled to do it. He double booked. He told someone else he'd be somewhere. He calls me up. Man, you got to fill in for me. So I get on a plane, and this was very last minute. I jump on a plane. I'm hurrying to the airport to get this done. I'm in Portland. This was in LA, so it wasn't overly hard to get to. But once I got there, from my perspective, I've never seen Anderson since we left the cage. And when we left the cage, it was not on good terms. But I am a firm believer, maybe this is my wrestling background, I'm a firm believer, though, you shake hands and you walk away. Whether when your way or not, you shake hands and that dispute is settled. But I didn't know if he had that same code. I mean, I don't know. And I had never seen him. I was even hoping to run into him in the back and just tell him hello. But at least, to disarm him. Because one thing that I didn't want, when I'm up there, and don't forget, I'm filling in for Ariel, so I kind of have to program my head. What would Ariel do? What would Ariel's? But that's a real thing that was at least going through my head. What I didn't want is for Anderson to think that I was going to double cross him, that he's going to get on stage and all of a sudden he's taking on Jake and me, or that I would go into business for myself and try to put myself over. I just didn't want him to know that. I mean, this was his moment, it was his press conference, and I would have loved to have ran into him first. But it didn't happen. And so, what you saw on stage was very organic and it was very pleasant, very, very pleasant, the way he behaved.
I agree. I think it came across awesome. And that's one of the things we love about MMA is after fights happen, seeing the two fighters come together. How surprised were you that this fight is happening? I think some people were, in the sense that you see the sort of the strategy of Jake and picking his opponents, but Anderson Silva is one of the greatest fighters of all time, despite him being as old as he is.
The gig is up with the Paul boys. I mean, I think with Logan, that litmus test was passed the night he got in there with Floyd Mayweather. And I mean, right, you don't joke or you don't play with Floyd, but you don't play with Anderson. And for Jake Paul to go, I mean, it was somewhere within the pandemic, so somewhere recently, and I even watched it. Jake Paul fight some guy that was known for dunking basketballs, and he goes from that guy in a short period of time to the GOAT. And I mean, I just think that it's a very honorable thing. If a guy is serious, if a guy is sincere, if a guy's coming to come over to a sport, and in this case, it happens to be boxing, and he's making a mockery of it, that's really going to bother people. But I mean, those days are behind us. That conversation is behind us. He's going to fight Anderson Silva. There is a respect. Is that the word? An honor. And he deserves credit for it, man.
Yeah. What do you make of the people who are still saying that, Jake's fighting older fighters?
Yeah. Hey, I'll tell you what, they're worried. I mean, boxing truly is very worried that some guy can step in later in life without a full focus and do well. And you know what? I'm one of those people to a degree. Like, that's never happened in the sport that I really care about, wrestling. That's never happened. It has happened in MMA. I've seen it a couple times where Matt Horwich comes to mind, if you remember Matt Horwich. But he went on to be the IFL champion. He fought in the UFC a number of times. I think he had 1 win and 2 losses. Very good career, though. He started at 26 years old, and I mean with no background. He was not a high school anything. So I have seen it in MMA. I've never seen it in the sport of wrestling, and now we're seeing it in boxing. Is it a sport that you got to be a second-generation guy? Do you have to start it at 9 years old? Is it truly a sweet science? Like, all of these things are up for test. James, if I could be long-winded, but I'll just remind you, if you go back to 1993, and I know that you do with this sport, we thought that karate was going to love us, and taekwondo was going to, and aikido and kung fu, they were all going to love it. They were all going to come together, and we're going to draw from all these people. When those sports found out that they were not going to be represented very well in terms of success, they told their students, don't watch. That isn't real. Our techniques are too dangerous. That's why we don't. I mean, they came up with this whole line of garbage. But I'm just sharing with you the psychology. We have seen this before, and the boxing community is scared to death that a 25 years old, he's very young,
there, mid-20s,
is going to step in, and be able to beat people. And he's already beaten world champions. He's already knocked out world champions. And that's where that comes from. They don't really care that Anderson's 46 years old. They're trying to take away from Jake before it happened. They've been doing that to Jake from Jump Street.
Well, how do you feel like the fight will play out?
Well, I mean, Anderson's really good. But one thing that people miss is he's also very tough. And in this sport or in any sport, you don't have to be. If you can be a champion just by being more technically proficient than everyone else, or you can do it by having more grit and pushing harder, right? Like called the Justin Gaethje approach. But Anderson's both, and people miss that. If I was to use MMA terms, you go show me a 5th round, and he was the king of the 5-rounders. I mean, he was in a 5-round fight, his second match into the UFC, and his last match, he was the main event. He's the king of the 5-rounders. You go show me a 5th round that Anderson Silva lost. And you might be able to produce it, but I can't think of it. And that includes over Nate Diaz, who is known for those 4th and 5th rounds. Anderson Silva can hold up. He's extremely durable. Anderson Silva should have lost to Chavez Jr. Not only because the judges should have given it to Chavez, because that's what they do in boxing. He should not have been able to hold up. If you remember Conor McGregor, he represented himself in our sport very well against Floyd. But he should have faded about 3 or 4 rounds in. He made it a half an hour, but he never should have made it 12 rounds. And I mean, I just bring that to you. It's a different endurance. Anderson Silva holds up. People always miss his grit. They miss what a competitor he is. And I think that's going to be on display. I think that Jake's going to fight him, though. I think Jake's going to walk right out there and go for it.
Another big name in the news, Khamzat Chimaev. I watch your channel, Chael, so I know you're all up to date on everything. But I know you suggested that his next fight should be at 185, and I get the idea there with him missing weight, and just maybe his frame being too big as well. But just devil's advocate on that, do you not feel like his path to a title would be a little bit easier at 170 because he has the 2 ranked wins as opposed to not having any ranked wins at 185? I was curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do think that he could get to a championship very fast at 185. I mean, I think you could package him up and sell him to the audience as this undefeated guy that's been in the division. I mean, everybody knows who he is. He's an absolute media sensation. But if you wanted to follow more of a trajectory of the history of the sport, you would have a hard time. Dana White even said at the press conference, and I quote, he said, a title shot is a challenge. And Dana just meant how I tell the other boys in the back, how I let this be an example where you know, something good, it's a challenge. He didn't say no, but I agree with him. I do think that's a challenging sell. 185, though, you know, he's a match or 2 away. I don't know that Chimaev's going to be world champion, but he could be. He's good enough to be. You got to get that opportunity. And I don't think it's going to be what's next at either weight class. I think that he's going to have another match because of what Dana said, the challenge, and trying to sell that to the rest of the boys. That's what I think. And I do think he could probably 1 win away. Put him with Paulo Costa. Say he goes and runs over Paulo Costa. Yeah, man, he's fighting for a belt.
What about Colby Covington? You mentioned Colby as an option, maybe going up to 85, because there really is no clear-cut contender for the winner of Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Now, Pereira wins, obviously different story, but let's say Izzy wins that fight. We don't have a clear contender. What about Chimaev and Colby at 185, and the winner of that fights Adesanya?
Now, there's an idea. Nobody suggested that they both go up. See, yeah. I see what you're doing there, and I like that a lot. You want a prediction from me? I mean, this is out of left field, but just for fun.
Let's hear it.
I don't believe that Kamaru Usman is going to be fighting Leon next. Okay. I believe that Kamaru's next fight will be for a belt. I think they're going to keep Kamaru on ice. I think Chimaev versus Leon is a real possibility with the winner drawing into Kamaru. Now, that's out there. That's not even a rumor. Yeah. But I'm just sharing that with you. I think that if you have those 3 and you're going to match them up, the order does matter. And I think what I just presented is a more viable order, if you will.
Do you not think that's a hard sell, though, with Chimaev missing weight? Like, if he would have made weight, I'm with you there. But with the fact that he missed weight, I feel like some people feel as though maybe he needs one more fight at 170 just to make the weight. What do you think about that argument?
No, I think, you know what, I think that's great. Dana just left room when he used the word challenge. He didn't say no. I mean, if you remember, Vincenzo Luque was the backup fighter. Madison Square Garden, Usman versus Covington Part 2. He missed weight. The backup guy missed weight. Okay, but then he did not become a #1 contender like, say, Chandler did or, say, Kamaru did when they did a backup fighter role. So yeah, I do think that's real. You might remember a guy named John Leninger. Mm-hmm. He was a much smaller guy, but Lineker was promised this is a #1 contenders match. He missed weight, won the fight. Dana said, look, I can't honor that, but I'll do it again. Your next fight now becomes a #1 contenders match. He missed weight. He won the fight. Dana just couldn't give him the match. So I do think there's a history to that. And I do think that safer money is what you're saying. Chimaev doesn't go into a title fight after an 8-pound weight loss.
And just last thing on Chimaev, you sort of touched on it there. Do you see him as a future champion in either weight class based off what you've seen so far? Or do we need to see more?
Yes, he's not a lock for it. I mean, those boys at 170 can fight. You know, they really can. And then 185 is a big mess right now. I mean, if I would have told you that we're going to have a striking heavy guy that does absolutely no takedowns as our champion, you'd probably challenge that. And if I told you, no, wait a minute, James, it's actually the two best guys have never done takedowns and don't want to. And that's just not what we learned about this sport, you know, when they set that up in 1993 for the very first time. But here we are. And I'll tell you, there is nobody really pushing to get in with Izzy or Pereira. However, Whitaker versus Pereira is a very interesting match. And Whitaker returning to a title opportunity is a very, very tough sell. But I could see it because nobody else is stepping forward. So I like what you're saying about the 70-pounders bumping up. I think there is hope there.
Speaking of 70-pounders, what did you make of Nate Diaz's submission win over Tony Ferguson at UFC 279?
I loved it, and Tony's coaches took some heat for telling him to shoot. I tell you what, textbook says you take him down. That those coaches gave very good advice. They gave the same advice that other coaches would have given. I think that Tony represented himself well. What a swan song for Nate. I mean, Nate wakes up, he's a 12-1 underdog. In 24 hours, he's now a 2-1 favorite. On Monday morning, he's the darling of the sport that was supposed to be a lamb going to the wolves. I don't know that things could have gone any better. And quite frankly, it's what the fans wanted. Yeah. The fans really didn't want Nate in there with a guy that was 12-1 higher than him. I mean, we really didn't. We really didn't want to see Nate go get stomped, and I don't suggest that he would have. But had he, that's not what we wanted. We got what we wanted. We really did.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with that. Looks like Diaz is going to boxing next. Two-part question. How do you think he'll do in boxing? And two, who would you like to see him box?
I guess. I mean, we've been saying that he's going to go over there and fight Jake Paul, and we did that for about a year. And then all of a sudden, Jake Paul said, well, yeah, I would fight him, but we have no plan. And Nate says, I would never do it. That's really stupid. Fighters have the right to do that, to get headlines, but that Nate just doesn't have a history of that. When Nate tells us I'm going to or I'm not going to do, it's just always been. So I guess he's going to boxing. I mean, I can't imagine the money. He's probably staring at about $12 million with MMA math, about $12 million to go in there and fight Conor a third time. And I can't imagine there's that kind of money, even a half of that in boxing. So I know that's the rumor. I know that's what we keep getting told. I don't know how much I believe that it's true.
Well, also, like, do you think that Nate, I mean, by the sounds of it, you do, but do you think Nate will come back to the UFC? Because I don't. I think he knows his worth outside the octagon. And while you said a Conor McGregor fight won't make as much money, he could still box somebody that, you know, he could box a YouTuber and make, you know, really good money.
Sure. Hey, I hear what you're saying. And Nate said he was going to come back to the UFC. He said, I'm going to go do something. He wasn't very specific and didn't elaborate, but something else. And then he said, I'm going to come back. Now, like anybody, the clock's ticking. You know, so we'll see. If he did come back, it might be for one more. But there could also be a carve-out opportunity. If his deal's up and he was to come back to the boss and say, you know, I want to be able to do this, give me a carve-out, but I also want to have a contract with you if you can ever use me. I mean, it's not as though the UFC could really depend on Nate Diaz. In all fairness, he fought, once a year on average over the last 5 years, twice in really, really busy years. It's not as though things were really so they could bring him in. They could have some fun. They could do it on a one-off. I think it's a unique situation. It's not sustainable. It's not a business practice that Dana could turn to. But there could be an exception. That exception could definitely be Nate.
Yeah, we'll see. Did you see that video of him, by the way? I don't think it made it to air, but him making fun of the rock shoes that he had to wear on camera with Megan O'Leary. Did you see that?
I read about it. I didn't actually get to see it, or somebody that was there told me, but I heard about it, and I thought it was pretty good theater myself.
Hey, listen, it's great. And that's another reason why I don't think he'll come back, because of the, you know, again, all these different things that he didn't like. At least if he's on his own, he can control things. But you do bring up a good point that Conor fight's waiting for him there. That's guaranteed money, right? So
just making the comparison, because it does seem like this is a cash grab to some level, where I think you use the term Nate knows his worth, or maybe Nate isn't happy. I'm not sure that he's right if you can calculate around. I'm not sure there's anywhere else that you could go. I know Chatri couldn't pay him that kind of money. Coker's not going to offer him that kind of money. So if he is going to be MMA, it's going to be somewhere that we don't know about yet. You know, I think he's pretty safe at the UFC, and I think those are big numbers, and I'm not sure that it's going to pencil at the end of the day. But principle is also worth something. If Nate's standing on principle, power to him.
UFC 280 is next month. Huge fight between Charles Oliveira, Islam Makhachev. As someone who, made a career off of, building up fights, promoting them, what have you made about the gamesmanship going into this, with Charles sort of implying that Islam and his team are very arrogant? And we saw that tweet on the weekend about Khabib saying that, I don't even know if Oliveira is going to show up to the fight. What have you made of that angle going into the fight so far?
Khabib has talked more and been more interesting with his talk than any fight that he had, even ones that he was promoting for himself. I mean, Islam is very near and dear. This is the heir apparent to the throne, and that's according to the king, who is Khabib. So, I just think that's a fascinating spot. If you would have told me these two were going to fight, I never would have cared. 3 days before Islam fought Gaethje, I would not have. I don't even want to see it. Islam's going to take him down, keep him there. It's going to be 25 minutes, which is 20 minutes longer than we need to prove this point. I really did think that. I don't think that anymore. Charles Oliveira is better than I knew that he was. Charles Oliveira is laying out a very good case for why he thinks he can win, and I'm listening. I'm talking about the ranked opponents, talking about who he fought, talking about the positions that he thinks he will be able to deal with. I appreciate that from Charles, that I at least know that he knows what positions are going to be likely. Whether he can deal with it, that's between those boys. But I will just share for you, I am all of a sudden interested in that fight. And now you got guys like Chandler, you got guys like Gaethje coming out, guys within the division whose opinions matter. Got Benny DeRouche. They're all taking Charles Oliveira. Now, the fans don't agree. It's a 3-1 spread, and the only time that line moved, it went to 3.5 to 1. But that's got a real chip on Oliveira's shoulder. He can't believe the fans are picking against him. It's making him angry. And yes, the fight that I didn't know I even wanted, I can't wait to see that match.
So who wins? Who do you think? Chael Sonnen, we're putting some money on this. Who do you see winning that fight? Because I think it's very close.
Every technique that they have done since 1993, none of them work today. The sport has just evolved. None of them are around. A lot of the rules aren't even around except for one thing. If you get on top of a guy and you bludgeon him, you win. And that is what Makhachev does. I am taking Makhachev.
Do you think Alex Volkanovski gets the winner of that fight?
No, but I think that the winner of that fight better call out Volkanovski. I mean, Volkanovski is poking around in that weight class, and nobody is saying his name. Now, some guys might think that's out of respect, and some guys are going to say, well, he's not even in the weight class. They had better address that. Call him out instantly. I don't think that Dana's going to give him the opportunity. I mean, Volkanovski wants to go and be a backup fighter. Nobody else wants to do that. Now we're finding out that it doesn't sound like they're going to let him. They're going to take a fight that's already in the card, break that apart, throw him. I mean, that was the most recent news with DeRouche. So, I think that they're best. I think they should call him out. No, I don't think he gets the opportunity. If he can't get the opportunity to be a backup fighter, he can't get the fight. Not right now.
Does Conor McGregor ever return? He's got that role now in Roadhouse. We saw the video on Twitter the other day. It looks like he's in great shape, but we have not heard any fight news at all.
I think that he returns. Yes, I think he's getting better. I haven't got to see this Roadhouse business. Is that a reoccurring role?
No, I'm not sure. I think it's just a one-off, from my understanding, but we'll see if it sticks, because I'm not sure what's going on.
I was only curious if he's got to report every day to set. He can't, he can't be in there training. I think Conor comes back. I think he looks great. He's very big. I think he returns at 170. I don't buy that it's going to be a title fight business. But yeah, I think definitely. I think we're going to see Conor again, like 100%. At least I feel that way.
The other title fight coming up: Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira. How does Izzy approach this fight, knowing that he's lost twice? I know it's a different sport, but he's got other weapons he can use against Pereira. Pereira's got one. I mean, maybe he has more, but how should he approach this fight if he's fighting Alex Pereira?
And psychologically as well. Where's his head going to be at? I wish that more kickboxers would have weighed in. I wish we could have got the Rufus brothers or even a Maurice Smith to come back and talk about it, because we've never seen this. We have never seen two kickboxers. I've been referencing 1993 at the beginning, but that was always some form of grappling versus some form of striking. We never really put a judo guy with a wrestling guy. I mean, I would like that kind of stuff. We never put a taekwondo with a karate guy. My point being, we've never tested this. We have never tested two pure kickboxers. I mean, there is no takedown in store. Even if one of them wants to pull the great double cross, they don't have that weapon. They've both spent all of their time, as far as it pertains to wrestling, defensively. All the time in the practice room is just to stop takedowns and stay on their feet. I mean, I'm very confident telling you we have a kickboxing match with the little gloves on for the unified belt. And I don't know how this goes. Adesanya needs to dust it off and go touch him right away. The other side of his Pereira needs to make sure he makes first contact quick and hard and reinforce all the negative thoughts that Izzy's had for the last 4 years.
Who wins that fight?
Israel Adesanya, and I don't have the foggiest idea why. I truly don't. I'm trying to break that down. But the more information I get on Pereira, who's a little bit of a mystery right now, but the more I get, the better it is for Pereira. Guys that know that sport, guys that watched it, guys that studied it, guys that saw it back then. Now it comes out that Pereira is 52 pounds overweight. I didn't realize he was such a large man. I saw a side-by-side with him and Dominic Reyes. Dominic is a very good-sized 205-pounder. I mean, Pereira dwarfed him. So I didn't know these things about Pereira. Everything I find out about Pereira is a positive.
No, it's going to be a very interesting matchup. Stipe Miocic, we're hearing he's putting on some weight, as is John Jones. If they do end up fighting, is it possible we could see them around the same weight?
Yes, well, and that's a really big deal. It's a really big deal that Stipe be heavier than John Jones. This whole last 2 years of John's life, of walking away from a belt and moving up, this whole story is predicated on one notion, that John Jones is so good, but for the first time ever, he's going to be at a disadvantage. The disadvantage is he will take on a larger man. Well, John's weighing 240 according to Instagram. Stipe weighed in at 233 for his last fight. Now, there's a rumor that Stipe put on 20 pounds, but if Stipe doesn't get on the scale heavier than John, this whole experiment and the whole 2 years that John waited out is a waste.
Yeah. Do you think we see this fight? I mean, I don't know what is the holdup here, because this fight seems like they both want it. Are they waiting for Francis? Why hasn't this fight taken place yet?
I'd also like to know. I have the foggiest idea, and it appears that it's on Stipe's side, and getting information out of Team Stipe is very hard to do. Yeah. I mean, those guys, they just keep their mouths, they just do. And I don't know that Stipe's ever been asked. Stipe might answer us if we called him up, James, but I've never called and asked him. And John does appear ready to go. And I know John's running out of money. He's got the right to have to get in there and fight. And it does look like, well, we're getting closer to December, which means we're getting closer to Francis. Maybe we just push Stipe out of the way. I mean, I think all of these things are on the table. Ciryl Gane's got a great argument for a title fight, particularly an interim championship. But Ciryl Gane has got his head buried so far in the sand, he's not going to tell anybody. Curtis Blades is the hardest fight for John Jones. Far and away the hardest stylistic fight. Curtis isn't telling anybody that he should have the fight. I mean, it sounds like these three guys that you name, Stipe, John Jones, and Francis, are all on an island by themselves getting ready to do a round robin whenever they see fit. And the rest of the heavyweights have no problem with it. The heavyweight class is the biggest bunch of chickens I've seen. I mean, this sport is full of fake tough guys, but by God, they all found themselves in the UFC, all at heavyweight.
Who's your favorite fighter to watch right now? Now, I just said that on the spot. Who comes to mind?
Frankie Edgar. Frank Edgar is my favorite fighter.
Yeah, and he's got one left. Who do you think that fight will be? What would be a fun fight? I think him and Cruz. I think that would be an interesting matchup.
That's an obvious one. Of course it's him and Cruz. I don't know what has taken so long. I don't know how these guys have avoided each other. I don't know how. Everybody's saying what you just said. It should definitely be Frankie and Dominic Cruz, but I don't know that it will be.
When are you having that barbecue dinner with Anderson Silva?
You know, I don't know, but if I do go to that, I'll film it. I think there could be something there that could be interesting. So if it's a sincere offer, I would take him up on it. But I'm still not convinced that he really is having me over for dinner.
We're going to end on a dad joke. Have you heard the one about the reporter who made the guest disappear?